believe. Welcome to the jungle. We're taking day by day. If you want, you're gonna leave, but that's the price to pay. You're a very sexy girl, very hard to believe. You can taste the bright lights, you won't get them for free. In the jungle, welcome to the jungle. Feel my serpentine. I hear you scream.
Well, right from the start, Guns N' Roses living a rock and roll lifestyle. There's no mess about them. They're 100% committed to the rock and roll lifestyle. They're already deep into the drink and the drugs and the girls. I mean, they're having a great time.
You know, you say you really want a rock and roll band to be living the life you wish you lived.
You want drugs, you want girls, it's all here, boy. You just have to pay for it.
Guns N' Roses were literally the most important rock band to emerge since Led Zeppelin.
I once dubbed them the most dangerous band in the world, and I meant it.
I think everything Axl Rose did was a product of his upbringing.
Maybe he's just a tad eccentric or something like that.
I want you to believe. When you're high, you never wanna come down, 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 yeah.
After punk and before grunge, there was an era in the late 80s and early 90s when dirty rock and roll was reborn. Hard rocking bands in the US can be traced as far back as Chuck Berry and Bill Haley in the 1960s. The mammoth Van Halen and Aerosmith virtually wrote the book on bare-chested, strutting stadium rock. But punk blew it all away, and for some years it seemed that old-school rock and roll excesses were history. However, although many fans lay dormant for a while, they were still hungry for something new. It was the kick flares, dodgy makeup and 5-inch heels of glam rock that paved the way for the return of the bad boys. And in the mid-80s, bands like Motley Crue, Poison and Guns N' Roses kicked down the door again.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're Guns N' Roses, and this song is called Welcome to the Fucking Jungle.
The first time I ever heard Guns N' Roses was via their demos in the summer of 1986, and the guy who'd just taken over as manager, Alan Niven, I knew through him managing another band, Great White, and he said, I've just taken on this bunch, have a listen to their demos, see what you think. And I must admit, when I heard their demos, I thought, this is something special, this is quite good.
I think right from the off, Guns N' Roses definitely had something the bands didn't have. There was a punky edge to what they did. You know, a lot of these kind of poodle bands were... It was a dead scene, really. It's all dying off, you know, that kind of glam metal thing. It seemed really like daft, you know, by the late 80s. Everything moved on, and all these guys in spandex trousers and curly hair, they just looked like, they looked stupid, you know. It was kind of glam gone mad. The thing about Guns N' Roses is they had a much more of a street element to it. Yes, of course, they still had the kind of long curly hair, but it's much more a street look. It looked like you could go out like that. It wasn't like you couldn't wear spandex trousers and walk down the street, you know, like the other bands did. But Guns N' Roses, there's a punkiness to them. There's the punkiness to the music, and there's this incredible mad intensity to Axl Rose. He's already like one crazy guy from the start, you know. And the band can play really well as well, so I think it's marking them out right from the start.
It's subversive music, and ultimately that's what rock music is meant to be, is subversive. It's meant to threaten the establishment, and my God, did those guys frighten some people.
What was their special appeal? What gave them the X factor? What fueled the screaming howl of Axl Rose? The truth is painful and complex, but at the heart of the matter, in the centre of the band, stands a boy with a deeply tortured soul.
I think Axl Rose is a very unhinged character who had quite a messed up childhood, and you know, he brought his demons out in his music, and you know, I would imagine he was not that different off stage to how he was on stage.
So we want to dedicate this song to the people that try to hold you back, the people that tell you how to live, people that tell you how to dress, people that tell you how to talk, people that tell you what you can say and what you can't say. I personally don't need that. I don't need that in my life. Those are the kind of people that get me down. They make me feel like somebody out there is out to get me.
This isn't a man singing about the injustice of social evils as if it's something he studied at college. This is a man who experienced it firsthand, and it's this realism that fans connect with in such huge numbers.
You look at him as this kind of moany, spoilt brat, I suppose, but ultimately he didn't care about, you know, how he came across. I think he was just angry with the world, you know, really angry with the world. And then that is very much, you know, if you take Guns N' Roses as Axl Rose's band originally, you know, he was the guy that started this. I think they very much reflected his, you know, his problems with life.
It totally had to do with Guns N' Roses kudos, because at the time I think rock and roll's, it's always this kind of perennial battle with music, and this labels always try to make everything corporate and tidy it all up and make it nice, and all the bands, all the rock and roll bands at the time weren't nice, you know, they were dull, they were just like, they could get onto MTV all the time, their lifestyles are boring. Guns N' Roses are unapologetically horrible bunch of people, you know, and that's the attraction of them. Axl Rose is not a bloke you'd want to sit down and have a drink with, you know, he seems like he's obviously a very messed up guy. He's not a very nice person, but that's the attraction of the band. You know, why should people be nice in groups? The ugliness of Guns N' Roses is what makes them fascinating, and it's what kind of fires the music. It makes the music darker and angrier and messed up. It's a psychodrama. You know, you've got one pretty screwed up singer, and that's what makes him work. Because when he screams with his voice, he's screaming. It's a primal scream. He's coming from somewhere pretty deep. He's had a rotten upbringing. And it's all coming out, it's all pouring out, isn't it? It's all pouring out in a very ugly kind of manner.
Some people got a chip on their shoulder. Some would say it was me. I didn't matter to the whiskey that you gave me. So I'm a cool to the degree. They're gonna get me. They won't take me.
You know, a lot of it's come out in the music and stuff, and a lot of it used to come out in his performance as well, just the way he's kind of, he can be the softest, you know, singer to the hardest singer and everything in between kind of thing, which is what makes him not just a great singer but a great frontman, you know.
Take that one to height.
Take 5 boys, drums, bass, rhythm and lead guitar and a singer, stick them in Hollywood and add a toxic blend of drugs, alcohol, sex and all the complex emotions that come with troubled childhood backgrounds, and you have the basic components of Guns N' Roses. The Guns bit comes from a brief spell Axl spent with Tracy Guns in the band LA Guns, to which he added his long-term guitarist friend Izzy Stradlin.
I don't know. I mean, with Guns N' Roses, it was really like, between Axl and I, it was a lot of intense criticism on each other, like when it came down to songwriting. Like half the songs I would play to him, he would go, "Oh man, that's fucking Black Sabbath, that's Led Zeppelin, blah, blah, blah." And I'd go, "What the fuck are you talking about? This is something completely different." And he would, you know, we'd argue back and forth about this stuff. He was a real nasty critic, you know.
Wow.
So sometimes there was a lot of nitpicking in the music, trying to get stuff finished, but I guess in the end it came out okay, you know?
Yeah.
Then Michael Duff McKagan joined on bass, and when problems with Tracy and the drummer Rob Gardner reached their nemesis, it was Duff who suggested two members of another LA band, Road Crew, who might be able to fill the spots. So Steven Adler took over on drums, and Saul Hudson, nicknamed Slash, took over the lead guitar spot. Guns N' Roses was born.
There's no question to me that without the rapport between the various members of Guns N' Roses, and I'm talking about the classic lineup, and that is Appetite, nothing would have happened.
That band would not have sounded like they did if it hadn't have been exactly that group of characters. If you'd have replaced any one element, certainly at the start, they would not have been the same band that we're talking about now. You know, there was a unique mix of characters. Particularly, I mean, the main two characters, musically, the biggest elements of Guns N' Roses were obviously Slash and Axl Rose. But, you know, the other guys weren't just hired hands. You know, they made up, it was the perfect rock and roll gang.
There was just a mix of, you know, you had Duff, the bass player, who was from Seattle, who was very much inspired by the punk scene and stuff like that. Then you had Axl Rose and Izzy Stradlin, who'd come from the same place and moved to LA.
Izzy Stradlin went to school with Axl Rose, and he was the first one out of those two to move to LA, and he encouraged Axl to move out to LA with him. It took Axl a few goes. He stayed with Izzy about 3 times before he moved out with his girlfriend to move out to LA. So I think he's quite instrumental in that. I mean, that's quite instrumental putting the band together, getting your eventual frontman to move out to LA. So, and B, the songwriter is key as well. He wrote some of the classic songs.
And Izzy was the character in the band who was the gypsy. Izzy was a songwriter, but very much the gypsy who seemed to be there without being there. And in a strange way, he held the band together more than anybody else, because everyone in the band seemed to turn to Izzy to see what Izzy felt and Izzy thought. And you have the rhythm section. Steven Adler, not the greatest drummer in the world, but a drummer who fitted perfectly into the rock and roll diatribe that was Guns N' Roses at the time.
And just in case you think all rock musicians meet in dingy backstreet clubs and make pacts with the devil between lines of coke, actually Slash and Adler met due to a head-on crash on skateboards. The coke came a bit later, and the rest. On June the 6th, 1985, this lineup of Guns N' Roses played their first ever gig at the Troubadour Club in Hollywood. The Troubadour has been host to many new bands and established stars as well. The Doors, Hendrix, Janis Joplin, to name but a few.
G&R Live were always an experience. And when they got it right, when Axl was on form, they were unstoppable.
Guns N' Roses' early gigs at the Troubadour basically brought the band to the attention of the music business in Los Angeles. Without those early gigs, and without the fact that the industry were all there, they wouldn't have got the momentum that they got behind them in order to create this huge buzz about a bunch of wasters, basically. You know, these guys, the buzz that was around that band was the biggest. It was the biggest story in rock music in, I would say, 10 years.
I think the press trying to set them up as being this kind of very kind of controversial band with this kind of LA lifestyle, because they just had the Beastie Boys thing there, and I think they're looked on as being this, here's a next crazy bunch of controversial Americans going to come in. Whereas the Beastie Boys weren't actually that controversial, because they're kind of like a bit more thinkers, really, aren't they? Guns N' Roses are completely wallowing in the rock and roll lifestyle, and that created a lot of interest as well. There was like, eventually, you know, here's new bad boys of rock and roll, and you like they unapologetically take loads of drugs and they drink, and Media's fascinated by this kind of stuff, you know, like people who take drugs, you know, as if that's more interesting than music.
After another gig in Seattle, the band embarked on what was aptly called the Hell Tour, covering several venues. All of these would turn out to be disastrous, with the usual problems of fly-by-night promoters, rotten PAs, dire accommodation if any at all, and the usual fights with either police or punters or both. Violence and chaos was a way of life.
I think whenever they were tempted to be violent, it was because of provocation. They never started things themselves. Yes, Axl sometimes incited, shall we say, riots, because he'd get angry about someone with a camera in the audience or someone saying something to him in the audience. But again, it was provocation. In his eyes, he wasn't starting something, he was finishing something. And he did jump in the audience on occasion and punch somebody out who had a camera, which led to all sorts of problems.
Hey, take that! Take that! Now, get that guy and take that! I'll take it, goddammit!
I think Guns N' Roses are one of those bands who never looked to incite people or goad people into doing something just for publicity. They were happy going about their business. But if somebody started on them, they sure as hell were not going to let it go. And they would actually react back very badly indeed.
Well, thanks to the lame-ass security, I'm going home.
I think the violence was an integral part of Guns N' Roses because I don't think Axl Rose was a very nice bloke. You know, so it's very difficult to separate one thing from the other. And it was the sound of violence. You know, it's a bit play on words, but that was a kind of violent sort of sound. I don't think the other guys were running around getting themselves into the same sort of scrapes that Axl Rose was. But it'd be very difficult to have Guns N' Roses as a credible band without Axl Rose. And so the fact that, you know, he was allegedly this misogynistic, violent homophobe, you know, it was very much an integral part of the makeup of the band. Now, that's not politically correct, but then they weren't a politically correct band.
But this tour really cemented the band. They were tight at every level, and they needed to be, considering the grueling road up ahead. The band created a massive buzz, especially on the West Coast club scene, and they were blowing sellout audiences away. It was Geffen that finally inked a deal with them on March the 26th, 1986. They released Guns N' Roses' first single in '87, a double A-side, It's So Easy and Mr. Brownstone.
Around 7, get out of bed around 9, and I don't worry about nothing, no, because it wasn't a waste of my time.
The label had promised not to interfere with the band's creative process, and true to their word, Geffen let them get on with it in the studio. But had it not been for the phenomenal success of Guns N' Roses, they may not have been so accommodating. Indeed, in later years, Geffen would take back control. Had the label known that Mr. Brownstone was written about heroin, they may have had second thoughts. Tragically, heroin was to play its part in the downfall of the band's personal lives and their careers.
Guns N' Roses were a very extreme band from the time I first met them. They always came across as a band who'd go 3 or 4 degrees further than anybody else. I once dubbed them the most dangerous band in the world, and I meant it. It wasn't an epithet just for the sake of coming up with something sensational. They were very dangerous because they were completely unpredictable. I saw them do certain things which were a bit, good grief, this is ridiculous. And a lot of that was fueled by a desire for everything under the sun, be it alcohol, be it heroin, be it cocaine. Ultimately, it was to be a lot of their downfall because they couldn't get out of that cycle that took them down into the pit.
I think the hedonistic element of Guns N' Roses has been overplayed because eventually they were actually turned into these cartoon figures. But actually, this band were a bunch of hedonistic, drug-taking, misogynistic bastards. You know, they were real bad boys. Now, they walked it like they talked it, so I think everyone in rock and roll wants to appear like they're dangerous, but I think Guns N' Roses were a real handful. You know, you would not want to take these boys home for tea.
Axl himself was on drugs to actually alleviate and help him with medical condition, manic depression, and he was constantly unpredictable. You never knew from one moment to the next what Axl was going to do or Axl was going to say. Slash got into heroin later on and found it very difficult to get out, as did Izzy. Duff was very much into alcohol, but they all unfortunately did too many drugs. And it also led to eventually to the sacking of Steven Adler because Axl's girlfriend, Erin Everly, at the time, also got into doing various things. Axl and Erin fell out so many times, and on one occasion, she ended up crying on Steven Adler's shoulder, and I don't mean that as a euphemism, that was what happened. Steven, in order to try and calm her down, allegedly suggested she take some heroin because that would help. She didn't. However, word got back to Axl that Steven had injected her, and I know Axl went around LA with a shotgun one night and a few friends looking for Steven, and if he had found him, I suspect he would have shot him dead. That's how much they were playing, these drugs were playing a part in their career. It nearly ruined the band, but in those early days, it fueled what they were all about. It accentuated every part of their fibre, of their personality, for better and for worse, ultimately for worse.
However, it is likely that the executives at Geffen were quite relaxed about the band's drug use because they considered it to be a part of the Hellraiser image they wanted to perpetuate. Whatever the situation, Slash, Izzy, Duff and Steven Adler all fought long, hard battles with drink and drugs. During the early years, Axl also admits to his fair share, but what he was masking with his intoxication was far more sinister. The frontman of Guns N' Roses threw massive energy into a performance. Anger, frustration and hatred all played a part, but what was it that fired him up? From just the age of 2 years old, Axl suffered sexual abuse and beatings from his stepfather, whilst witnessing the same being forced on his mother and sister. This childhood trauma left a shattered, confused and deeply damaged teenager. A child who'd endured such hell of his own found emotional attachments were fraught with complications.
Axl, as a live performer, is one of the most exciting, one of the most charismatic, one of the most focused I've ever seen, on occasions. There are other occasions when he's a rambling, raging idiot, just going on off on monologues about anything and everything.
So he's kind of got this kind of background. He's rebelled at school. You read interviews saying he couldn't get any girls' school because he had ginger hair as well. It's like, it's quite great, and everything goes down to a really petty kind of level, doesn't it? So he goes to LA and he becomes a rock star, and he's got his hand on the honeypot. I mean, this is just wow. I'm the guy that everyone shunned at school. Now I'm the top dog. But he's add on to that, he's got kind of more kind of deeper issues when he's growing up as well. So this all adds into this one intense package. So he comes over this. He's got a very ugly kind of persona.
He's never come to terms with who he is or what he is. It still wells up inside him. He still feels the need and occasion to mentally and verbally abuse people for no reason at all. He still feels the need to surround himself with yes men who, when he says jump, they say how high. He's never come to terms with his past, which is very dark, very locked into a childhood that wasn't very happy. He's still trying to express all that. And even when he expresses it, he still feels the rage within him. It fuels his hate. It fuels his rage. It's not cathartic. Makes him a fascinating individual, but it makes him someone with a chip on both shoulders, very balanced in that respect, I suppose, and also someone who can go off at a tangent at a moment's notice.
The whole thing of Welcome to the Jungle is everything about living in LA and you know, it being such a strange place to live, and especially when you've moved from far afield and you're trying to do something there. You know, LA's a place where if you're an actor or a musician or trying to make it in any way, everyone moves there, you know, so there's so much going on, and it's just their view of it kind of thing, and it's just a great song, just a great sort of anthem in a way, you know, of the whole late 80s LA scene and stuff, which is, you know, just a great song, and sort of says everything about an introduction for the band as well, you know, like this is us and this is what we do.
Welcome to the jungle. We got fun games. We got everything you want. We know the next couple of people that can buy whatever you may need. If you got the money, honey, we got your disease in the jungle. Welcome to the jungle. What you bring it to? What you bleed.
The jungle had a dual meaning. On the one hand, it represented the madness of living in LA, perhaps overwhelming for a country boy like Axl coming from Lafayette, Indiana. But on the other hand, it summed up the wild, bawling mess of rock and roll at large.
It made you think, wow, this is a bit different. It stood apart because of that opening ominous guitar crescendo that made it stand away from everything that was going on at the time, because you did have different scenes happening, be it punk, metal, big hair, thrash, didn't matter, this was different. And the opening yowl of Axl as well sets it up, and suddenly it drives into the song. It was an anthem, but a very dark anthem. It was about going to the big city, as it were. And while other bands expressed it in a different way, in a very superficial way, Axl got to the root of the problem. You step off a bus from Indiana into Los Angeles, and you're suddenly confronted by everything is here on the streets. You want drugs, you want girls, it's all here, boy. You just have to pay for it, and you're going to pay for it in a way you probably don't even appreciate or understand.
Welcome to the Jungle's, it's very anthemic. It's kind of taking the LA kind of sounds, that the kind of poodly rock sound, but again, they've got that punk element to it. It's somebody's obviously got punk records collections, so they understand the music's moved on. It's got to be tougher, it's got to be harder, it's got to be meaner, it's got to be more concise. You can't just rabbit on about rubbish anymore.
And you see the video, and the video represents what the song is all about. It starts with Axl getting off a bus, and of course at the end Axl says, and you're gonna die. And it made an impact because it was sort of not glossy, doesn't have a happy ever after ending. This is about reality. And Guns N' Roses immediately set themselves up as a band different to others. Yes, they had their influences, from Aerosmith to Rose to Two to AC/DC to Hanoi Rocks, but what made them different was the fact that it was individual.
Inside the jungle of the band's own making, you would have found its members indulging in serious excesses. Duff McKagan, by his own admission, was drinking gallons of vodka a day, on top of 3 or 4 grams of coke. It was no surprise that finding a manager for a band like this was going to be testing. Even Tim Collins, who managed the totally toxic Aerosmith, turned down the job. It eventually went to Alan Niven.
We couldn't get a manager to save our lives.
Really?
They'd come in, they'd take one look at us and leave. We met them all. I remember one guy, me and Slash had just come back from Tijuana, and we had tequila. We had an apartment down in off of Sunset there, and we had tequila, and you know that black tar heroin was like the thing of choice back then. Whenever we could get it, we were dabbling at that time too. We didn't have serious habits. But, you know, I remember just, you know, we sit on the couch and one of the guys came in to meet us and he was there 10 minutes and he just, you know, he must have known. I guess when you're that stoned, you think nobody else knows. We're all sitting there like thinking we're cool. They saw that shit, but, so, you know. And then Alan Niven came along and thank God he came along because he took us on and he, you know, he probably looked at it and go, yeah, they're a mess, but, you know, I think he'd been there maybe himself and he saw potential and he worked with us and he kind of, whether anybody says it or not, he became like the 6th silent member.
Wow.
And he was like major factor in getting Guns N' Roses out of this town.
Oddly, Niven didn't invest much confidence in the band and thought their first album, Appetite for Destruction, wouldn't sell very well. Fortunately for the band, he underestimated the power of songs like Sweet Child of Mine that would hit a massive audience.
One of the strange things about Appetite is when it first came out, one of the songs on it that no one really picked up on was Sweet Child of Mine. Everyone raved about Welcome to the Jungle, Paradise City is tremendous, Rocket Queen, My Michelle, Mr. Brownstone, etc, etc, etc. But Sweet Child of Mine, to my recollection, somehow got missed. Maybe it was because it was a little softer and it was seen as a little bit of a romantic number that didn't fit into the Guns N' Roses ethos. It only started to pick up when they did the video and when they released it as a single.
The basic layout of Sweet Child of Mine is obviously it's that riff that makes the song. Apparently a riff that started off as a jokey thing while they
deal with that. And I still believe it's serendipity. Yes, there were elements you can take out, great songs, controversy, rock and roll attitude, but there's an extra factor, the X factor if you will, that drives a band to that level because you can't market it. You can market an album in America maybe to 2 or 3 million. Very clever marketing can take it to that level. To take it to 20 plus? No way. It happened. It just had its own life and its own momentum. And it kicked into the mainstream and just went and went and went.
I think Guns N' Roses captured the zeitgeist, and they managed to articulate a feeling around that time, a feeling of dissatisfaction in the 80s for a certain type of person. And you know, I think it was subversive music, and everyone likes the idea of being subversive even if they're going back to their desk job.
At the time of its release, many of the band's fans wouldn't have known that the storms the Pretty Boy singer was sheltering from were so cruel and twisted. But there was always the other side of the coin, Paradise City.
Paradise City was it's a great swaggering rock and roll anthem. I mean, if you got to Guns N' Roses because of Sweet Child of Mine, you probably think that's the kind of stuff they were doing. But Paradise City shows the probably the true nature of the band. It's punky and it's rock and roll. It's all meshed together perfectly. You know, it's dirty, grindy, messy riff. You know, and it's singing about LA and it's singing about the trash of LA, the dirt of LA. A thing that they've returned to again and again in their kind of in the next little mini career. What was the celebration of rock and roll and all the kind of rock and roll lifestyle, the sex, the drugs, the rock and roll, LA, the whole thing mashed together.
From a fan's point of view, I wouldn't say it's one of their best songs, but commercially it was one of the best. I mean, the thing is, it wasn't as with some of their singles and songs, I think the downside in terms of commercial success was that they were quite long, and that, you know, you only have a certain time to have stuff played on radio, which is, you know, 3 or 4 minutes or whatever. But Paradise City is a long song, but again, another feel-good song, another sing-along song, and when you watch them finish a concert with it, it's just everything about that band, you know, and they give it everything.
If there's one song that sums up Guns N' Roses' primal appeal, it's Paradise City. The energy and the simple message that paradise is a place where the grass is green and the girls are pretty won the hearts of rock fans all over the world.
Paradise City is the epic, if you want, of Appetite. And it builds and builds, but you're never quite sure what's going to happen. And then suddenly you've got this moment where everything almost becomes freeze-framed, where Axl goes into a single note, where the whole thing comes to a coalescence. And then it opens up into this absolute dynamic, driving rock and roll song that is almost thrash.
These singles were so dynamic, it's not hard to see why Appetite for Destruction rose steadily to the top of the Billboard charts. Their success was no doubt helped along by the burgeoning influence that MTV's Rock channel was having on music lovers in the States. Until MTV had arrived, it had been difficult for bands to conquer the entire country, but now a good video on TV could break a band across all borders.
Those 3 songs are so exciting because they're sexy and they're dangerous, and also they are great rock songs. You know, you can sing along to them. They don't alienate people that don't actually listen to heavy rock music, which is, you know, that's a key element. You don't have to like any kind of heavy rock music to like those Guns N' Roses songs. You really don't. And to have that kind of mass appeal where you transcend your core fan base is quite rare.
Because I know people who were into GNR in 1987, who bought Appetite for Destruction, who 2 years later said, don't lie, the album is shit. So, but it's the same album. It's not changed. The attitude's not changed. Yeah, but even these pop fans like GNR now, I don't want to know. And I think that was a sad sign because GNR hadn't changed. They never compromised. People had come to them, and I think for the diehards not to realise it makes you wonder how much they understood the band in the first place.
But I'm still alright to smile. Girl, I think about you every day now. There was a time when I wasn't sure, but you put my mind at ease. There is no doubt you're in my heart now. Said woman, take it slow and we'll come together fine. 'Cause all we need is just a little patience.
Back at Geffen, executives brooded as they waited patiently for Guns N' Roses' next album. To satisfy hungry fans in the meantime, they released GNR Lies. This punchy title was a watered-down version of what our hedonists really wanted to call the album. Originally titled Lies, the sex, the drugs, the violence, the shocking truth. This was an EP containing 8 songs. The cover was a parody of the front page of one of the British tabloids. The EP was a mix of 4 animalistic live tracks and 4 relatively relaxed studio recordings. During 89 and 90, the touring eased off and the band were under ever-increasing pressure from Geffen to produce the next album. But all was not well in the Guns N' Roses camp. Substance abuse was reaching critical levels, with their manager claiming his band took $2.5 million of dope before they finished any records. The drug abuse led to Izzy Stradlin dropping out on guitar to be replaced by Gilby Clarke. Strangely, drummer Steven Adler had also been sacked due to massive drug abuse to be replaced by Matt Sorum. But Axl lost no sleep over either of their departures, later revealing that getting them to work on the album was like pulling teeth.
I think Izzy Stradlin leaving the band was the beginning of the end for Guns N' Roses. Now that doesn't mean he had such a huge influence on the band musically, but it dissipated the band, and I think they lost the real vibe, the essence of what Guns N' Roses were about.
For me, as soon as the 5 guys started to fall apart, that was the moment GNR lost its magic. Steven went first, and Matt Sorum, who came in on drums, is a far better drummer, but he ain't Guns N' Roses drummer. It's the same way that you can think of 100 better drummers than Lars Ulrich in Metallica, for instance, but works with him because of everything that goes on. So as soon as Matt Sorum came in, something went from Guns N' Roses. Albeit not a great drummer, but someone who was part of the gang. Izzy decided during the whole process of Use Your Illusion, he'd had enough. He'd had enough of Axl's tantrums, had enough of the lifestyle, had enough of everything that surrounded Guns N' Roses. He was never comfortable with being in a rock and roll band that big.
It was kind of like he was, although I really dug him in the scheme of things, it's kind of like he's quite dispensable in a way, that whole slot.
Izzy's a free spirit, And his freedom, strangely enough, when it happened, meant that Guns N' Roses lost their discipline. Strange but true.
But life had to go on, and despite all the friction, the recording was finally finished in 1991. There was so much material produced from the band's sessions that Geffen eventually released it as 2 double albums, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2.
You know something? I can't think of one track from either of those albums that has made any kind of lasting impression on me. Now there are some quite good songs on there, but you know, I just think they're not very good records. You know, there's 2 albums there, and they would have made a decent single album. You know, they just got carried away with themselves and their own hype. And I'd say it's quite difficult not to when you're that big, when you're playing stadiums after your first album. I think it's actually quite difficult to keep your ego in check. Remember, in the music business, it would be very difficult for anyone to say no to them at that point. So, you know, it's the Oasis Be Here Now syndrome. Ultimately, everyone would have been telling them that everything they did was brilliant. So it was like, oh, let's make a double album and then release them as 2 single albums so we can make more money out of it. Great idea, Axl.
My hands are tied.
Perhaps if they would have combined the 2 albums and just released 1 album, you know, with half as many tracks, they would have had another Appetite for Destruction. But then, you know, they only released sort of 4 albums in their entire career, and so that would have been 1 less, and it just would have seemed not right, I guess.
Now, for most people, they say if Use Your Illusion had been 1 single album, distilling the best of the 2 double albums, it would have been better than Appetite. I disagree. I'm glad they did it that way, because I think it showed exactly where they were artistically, and I think we'd have lost a lot of wonderful music that simply wouldn't have made it onto a vote as to what songs should have been on a single album. For instance, I think of A Dead Horse, which is a fascinating piece of music that probably wouldn't have been on a single album, but is worth its weight in gold. Civil War may not have made it. It's too long. Or they would have edited it down. And I think again they would have lost some lines right at the end, actually saying what's so civil about war anyway. Those sort of moments I think would have been lost. So I think the nuances and the little pieces they put in to make these songs work in an elongated fashion certainly wouldn't have made it onto a single album. So for me, and I am in the minority, I agree, these are 2 very important double albums that needed to be 2 double albums.
Then it was back on the road again for the Use Your Illusion tour. In fact, the band were out on the road for nearly 3 years, ending finally on July the 17th in Buenos Aires, Argentina. It was more of an endurance test than a tour, and it took a heavy toll on the band. In fact, Guns N' Roses, in the lineup that many fans considered their best, would never gig again. In January '94, Axl played at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony and wasn't seen on stage again for the next 6 years. The next album has been named Chinese Democracy, but at a reputed cost of $9 million, the finished product has still not hit the shelves. During its recording, the spirit of the old band seemed to evaporate. In '96, Slash left. Then Matt Sorum was fired by Axl. Duff managed to hang on to the end of '97 before quitting, which left Axl operating with an ever-changing pack of session musicians.
What went wrong with Guns N' Roses? I think Axl Rose is what went wrong with Guns N' Roses. You know, I think his ego just got so inflated that in the end, it was like Axl and his backing band, and that was never the point in the group. You know, I think in the end, Slash got bored of all the bullshit. You know, Slash is one of these, I would say, quite a simple guy in that, you know, he enjoys sitting there playing his guitar. That's actually what this guy wants to do, you know, on any given day. I should imagine when he's off duty, he's sitting there playing his guitar. You know, he'd be doing this for fun if he wasn't getting paid for it. And in the end, I think the excess and the bad boy behavior and the kind of abuse took over from the music with Guns N' Roses. And, you know, there's something, it's a waste. I think it was a waste of such a great band.
There's a lot of factors that brought Guns N' Roses to standstill. I mean, being on the road a lot, it's great fun, but it also with your kind of extracurricular activities and your extra chemical hobbies doesn't really do you much good, you know. And it exaggerates all the strains and stresses in the band. People living kind of different lives. He was getting very dictatorial as well, Axl. He got the band to sign him the name. He owned everything. He was sacking members here and there. He was sacking people out, telling the rest of the band. The relationship between him and Slash was pretty well dead. They weren't really speaking anymore.
To a large extent, I blame Slash. I think Slash was in a position where he could have stood up to Axl at any point and said no, but he never did. All he kept doing was compromising, to the point where finally, when Axl infamously put in front of the rest of the band a piece of paper saying, unless you sign this and hand me over the rights to the name Guns N' Roses, I'm not going to go on stage tonight and there's going to be a riot. They did it. And I remember talking to Slash a couple of years ago and he said, well, he got him on stage. Said, yeah, but at what price? The price was you lost your band. It's a crazy price to pay. They never stood up to him. And this to me is why I don't blame Axl so much, I blame Slash. Because Slash knew what was going on. He never tried to stop it. And he just went with the flow. Axl was on a separate floor to the rest of the band in hotels. The rest of the band couldn't call him up. The rest of the band couldn't go and see him without going through intermediaries. How crazy is that? That is not a band. That is just a bunch of people wondering why they're still going on stage together.
Whether the fans and the corporate execs have much sympathy for the devil in Axl Rose, only time will tell. The band has now changed beyond all recognition. In fact, there is no band to speak of anymore. Just the enigma of Axl, the veritable Howard Hughes of rock and roll, and the fans' tireless fascination in him and what his next move may be. Axl Rose believes that he is the band, but as his original fans touch their mid-40s, his time may be running out if he doesn't up his game soon. What remains for all of us, though, is a superb legacy from a band who changed the face of rock and roll forever.
Guns N' Roses were literally the most important rock band to emerge since Led Zeppelin. And they kicked the door down for everyone else and changed rock music overnight. Literally, that one band, that one album changed rock music and made it quite cool again and made it dangerous again, which is a real key element. You know, they were like the last gang in town, and they really were. This wasn't a marketing creation. This wasn't some, you know, PR stunt. They were the last gang in town.
We hope, I still hope, it's a legacy to come, because the great lineup will get back together, with or without Stephen, but certainly with Duff, Izzy and Slash and Axl. I'm sure it's going to happen 3 or 5 years down the line. But right now, Guns N' Roses' legacy lies in Appetite for Destruction. It lies in the enormous energy of that record, the inspiration of that record, the songs on that record, everything about one of the greatest pieces of music ever committed to vinyl and never released. And the legacy, strangely enough, lies in the fact that every generation listens to Appetite and realizes and understands why it's held in such thrall, because they can relate to the anger, the frustration, the bitterness, the hope, the ambition, and the dreams of 1987, when nearly 20 years down the line, kids who are not born then can understand and relate to what they were talking about, because that hasn't changed. That is their legacy to the history of rock and roll. And there are very few bands of whatever stature who can actually lay claim to anything that comes close to the stature of that album.